Hello, everyone. And it has been 2 years since I've gotten to do this, so I'm very excited to welcome you back once more to Moxtober, which is a yearly card design. I was going to say challenge, but that's not it. It's an event. It's a card design event where for each day of the month of October, there's a different one word prompt. And using that prompt, people just design a card inspired by that prompt and whatever uh, train of thought it makes them follow. It's been ongoing for God, how long now? And this is my subtle way of introducing my guest, Juliet, a member of the
Mhm.
Beacon Creation team, who uh, originally set up and ran this event. And so I am subtly throwing it to Juliet to answer how long Moxtober's been going on.
Oh, that's an excellent question. I think 2020 is kind of the real launching off point.
Mm-hmm.
If it pre-exists 2020, it must have pre-existed 2020. This is I'm gonna be honest. Anything in the 2016 to 2020 era is all just a mash of time.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have specific memories of like anything that happens between those dates? But so we've been doing this for at least 4 years.
Yeah, and since then it's only grown exponentially, thanks to obviously the passion of community members and uh, honestly just like general outreach and the creation of tools uh, by people like Cajun. And actually, the only reason I'm able to do these videos is thanks to Cajun. So once more, I have to shout him out. And the reason for that is um, what I'm going to be doing today is looking over cards people have made for this prompt. Um, and I was able to collect all of these because instead of having to do this manually, Cajun has set it up where if you use the $ Moxtober command, you can submit cards to a collected MSC set file that anyone can then download and see all the cards people have made for this day. Um, you can even submit cards retroactively. So if you're just finding out about this, you can submit cards to this file. And while it won't be looked over in this video, people can find it when they download the file. So I'm going to be linking a few things in the description. I'm going to be linking the Beacon of Creation custom Magic Discord servers, which have spaces where you can submit these cards. I'm going to be linking the full file for all of these cards so you can check them out yourself. And I'm going to be linking the prompt list for Moxtober. So if you want to look ahead and see what the rest of the month has in store, you can do that. Um, but yeah, also, I guess before we get into it, again, we have limited time. People submit like dozens of cards to this, and uh, if we don't look at your card, it's not because it isn't a good design. It's because we are individual people with specific like things that
And we
catch our
are
attention.
showcasing a sample. Like this is showcasing a sample of the many different cards that are submitted, not a comprehensive examination of every card that someone has put on the internet.
Yeah, so um, basically, check out the full files. They're awesome. And while again, I really want people to submit their cards because I love looking over all of them. It isn't a guarantee we'll like talk about it, but it is a guarantee I'll see it and love it. So just as a little thing. Um, and yeah, I think that that's all standard disclaimers and explanations aside. Let's get into our first card. Hit us, Juliet.
Our first card's going to be New Leaf. It's designed and submitted by Reitzel.
Hey, and also
Mhm.
shout out Raidzel for being back in the community after a little bit. They're the winner of Beacon of Creation's first design league, and
That's true.
yeah, they weren't around for the second one, but definitely a designer whose work I've enjoyed in the past. So yeah, talk to me about this card.
So, this is New Leaf. It's a sorcery, uncommon, red and green. Exile a card from your graveyard, a card from your hand, and the top card of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may cast spells exiled this way. Flavor text. Why does the mother oak choose to birth children if she knows autumn will take them from her? Elvish riddle. So we've got an intriguing card advantage spell here. It's a kind of I think of this as like a RG counterpart to the like
Expressive
RU
iteration. Yeah.
exactly expressive iteration.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just like, you said "Are you"
Mhm.
instead of the name, and I was just like, just in case, gonna mention the name. Yeah,
Yeah,
keep going.
yeah. Exactly. It is funny though that I'm like, well, I'm probably gonna want to get the most out of this card by playing with Ren and Six, but maybe like this is for me. This is like okay, you ban Ren and Six and you print this so that people can still like play something in the 2 mana red green gold card.
Yeah,
Card advantage lands from your graveyard plays very well with fetch lands sort
yeah,
of
and I think
spot.
the interesting thing as well is right because you have to exile a card from your hand. The natural instinct is, oh, okay, I can play it until the end of my next turn, so I want to exile a land. But then also the best card, or the card you're most likely to have in graveyard, at least in the formats where I would hope this would be legal, right, is our
Mhm.
fetch lands. So, and if you hit a, I don't know what the timing is, but I'm assuming you're exiling before you know what card you're hitting from the top. So if you hit another land, all of a sudden it's like, hmm. So there are like definite choice points. Like don't get me wrong, this is like still absurdly powerful. It is very spiky in a way that I love, but I think that there is like meaningful play to it in a way that I think is important for cards that are both this simple and strong.
Mhm. It gives you some randomness, some choice, and some part of it is like very dependent on how the previous turns have gone as far as like what's going on in your graveyard. And I think that combination of factors, like those extra edges, make this even spikier than just red and green draw 3 cards would be like, oh, that would be powerful and appealing to spike, but like this lets you have that like edge of play advantage in a way that I think expressive iteration is also very appealing for that particular kind of like, hey, I'm getting great card advantage and good edge for my own like gameplay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that I could sit here and sort of like try to like work the screwdriver and figure out what the exact knobs are that this would be fine for in like a retail constructed environment. But I'm pretty fine just saying like, yeah, okay, just slam this in cube and it's incredibly sick and it's awesome. And like and like higher powered constructed formats are already so like densely saturated with powerful cards that I don't know that this would be like excessive. So like, yeah, it's just cool.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know, very fun little flavor text. The complete package is neat. Like I like the mechanics, I like the costing, but I also like all the different parts together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's a very tight card. This is the kind of card again that like
That
I've been
you and I like.
I guess yeah, but I've also just been thinking about like because there's been like back to back months of card competitions. There's been obviously Design League Season 2, Card Coliseum, which is a 1v1 single card design competition has been going on in MSC even before that. There's MSC Survivor Season 4 or 5, I forget the exact number, but I've definitely been like competition pilled, I guess, for the past like year, and this really feels like a card I think would play well in those contexts because it's just like there's just such a clean. It's just so clean. Yeah, it is a very clean card, and I think that it, you want a card that is simple to understand but difficult to work through the ramifications of, and I think this is good for that. Yeah.
So I think the next card we'll look at is Sunfall Wanderer. It's designed by Envoy of Aeons. It's a 3 and a white, 3/4 creature human scout common with 1 and a white. Sunfall Wanderer gains lifelink until end of turn. You may activate this ability without paying its costs if a land entered the battlefield under your control this turn. Flavor text: she seeks the setting sun, following it as it hangs longer in the sky.
My first impression is I really like this as sort of an alternate way to reward landfall, right? Because and like it doesn't have to be free. You can also do cost reduction on abilities, but this means that like it's a different knob, right? With landfall, you can tune the abilities to a certain degree because you have to keep hitting your land drops to actually make them happen every single turn. Um, which matters less for cheap cards, but matters a lot more for more expensive ones, like this one. Um, but if you want to sort of do an in between, you can be like, okay, here you have to pay mana into it, but then if you meet the landfall condition, you can circumvent that, allowing you to uh, just have better economy, I suppose, of what you want to do in that turn. This is yeah, again, this feels really clean as like a common. Now the question is, um, effective 3 power lifelinker. How safe would that be, especially with this body? But because it's much harder to have the lifelink on blocks and having to keep paying mana to it to do the lifelink and for it to not just be a vanilla, I think it works out. I think it's one of those things where it is a little bit of an alarm bell, but not enough that I'm like, oh yeah, okay, this is definitely not appropriate for common.
I Part of what really drew me to this is the cleanliness of it. You know, getting back to New Leaf as an idea that you mentioned, or getting back to cleanliness as you mentioned with New Leaf, that despite the number of words on this, I'm like, okay, yeah, as soon as I have this card in play, as soon as my opponent has this card in play, I instantly remember like the nuances of it, how it works. I don't have to like keep rethinking about it. As soon as I've read that rules text, it sticks in my brain. If that makes sense.
Yep,
Which is a thing that I think that's extremely important in commons. I think that's a really really strong element of making a good interesting common. And I don't know, you know, it depends on your format whether you want any any 3/4 life linkers at all. But I definitely think there's plenty of formats where, oh yeah, we'll have a 3/4 that's sometimes a life linker, and that's good to help slow things down along one particular vector.
for sure. Also, flavor wise, this is just a again. This is as someone who is such like a art slash flavor first designer. I do love seeing all the interpretations people come up with for the prompt, and this is just like I don't know. There's a very like medieval vibe to it, but also um, I love like the poetic framing of just journeying all day, right? Where it's just
Mm-hmm.
the like the flavor text is basically wow, she's traveling all the time. But it's
Or
to yeah, or sorry, go ahead.
is she, or like to me it's like, oh, she's going west.
Oh, right.
Like the flavor text is she's going west.
Yeah. But
She stays at the, she gets on her horse around noon and then starts going slowly, and then as the day gets longer she goes faster in the direction of west.
you know, fair, fair. Yeah, yeah.
But I agree that there's something like medievally poetic about that sort of idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that I don't know how to quantify it, but there is something about this that feels like it's fantasy, but it also feels like a very specific brand of fantasy that it does stand out a little bit for me. Like
Mm-hmm.
like it's a little less swords and sorcery and it's a more like not pastoral, but I guess like serfs. It has like instead of swords and sorcery, it's like serfs and swords, I guess, if that makes sense. It's a lot.
Sure. I
Yeah.
mean, I've been getting into more like romantic fantasy style storytelling, more um what I tend to think of as like 13th and 14th century like storytelling as we get into you know, if you think about things that are kind of contemporaneous with the Canterbury Tales, if you think about like your Tristan and your Isoldes, your stories like this, or if you think about like the Green Knight, you think about chivalric romances, that sort of characterization, especially as it gets into the like, I don't know, just a little bit of magic, just a little bit of fantasy. Why is this like knight going off on this one weird sort of quest? But they're not really a knight. They're just like a person with a horse and a vision or a dream. And like I am personally really charmed by that. That sort of, as you say. would you say swords and serfs
Yeah, yeah.
rather than swords and sorcery. Things that have overlap with and inspired a lot of what we think of as high fantasy today, but back in the day, like wasn't high fantasy 'cause,
It was.
like elves didn't exist,
Hmm.
as opposed to now where elves definitely
Yeah, yeah.
exist. As you do. The next card is going to be Embodiment of Autumn. It's designed by Ben W. Um, oh, looks like Dragon of the West. Cool. I'm seeing a subset here. Shout out of the West. Embodiment of Autumn is a single black mana for a 0/3 common creature elemental. When Embodiment of Autumn enters the battlefield, you may exile a land card from your graveyard. If you do, add black and green. Flavor text. Arel dreamed of summer's end. In the evening, she followed a strange trail and found a mushroom in the loam.
My first impression. Look, there's stuff to talk about mechanically. We'll get there. But
Mhm.
first, I wonder if this is just a throwaway flavor text, or I wonder if this is one of those people who's going to be doing a continuous storyline throughout Moxtober.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
if so, I would love to see more of Arel because this very much seems like a like start of a journey that starts with an end. You know what I mean? It's yeah, that's a classic.
Exactly.
That's a classic.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, what
Which,
was the mushroom about? Like I don't know, but you know what I mean.
in many ways, that's an interesting part of starting this month with the prompt of autumn. We did a big poll with a lot of different people contributing a lot of different ideas, and the number one theme to do this year was autumn as a theme. And so we worked hard to kind of arrange a very fun tapestry of prompts across the month.
Hmm.
I think the one that we end with will be very neat, but starting with autumn, I think starts us off in a very fun way to like get the idea of the theme like in your very first card of your submissions.
Hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of in 2020 when I started doing these. Um, I believe the first video I ever did was for harvest, which is the first word of that month, and there is something like really compelling about sort of having that pastoral change of the seasons thing because it can be interpreted. It's very much like this slow sense of change that can be represented in a lot of different ways depending on the person. So,
Mhm.
is it ominous? Is it comforting? Is it just uh, sort of like neutral without judgment, just how things are, sort of deal? Yeah.
And in many ways, sometimes it often seems that autumn in particular is like an interstitial season. Autumn is more of a season
Autumn
of.
is the Hufflepuff of seasons. Damn it! No.
Uh, I mean, I I don't know that word. I don't know what you mean, but in the sense of summer has a distinct identity of like the hot, and winter of the cold, and spring even of like new beginnings and everything, right?
Mm.
And autumn is, well, it's kind of the end point of one thing and not yet the beginning of another. I Rather than whatever that word was you said, you might think of this as the not a girl, not yet a woman. Uh from like a Britney Spears sort of perspective
Mm-hmm.
as far as autumn goes.
Uh-huh. No, no,
I expected a bigger laugh on that one, but
no, see, okay,
anyways,
again, it, my brain was because again, you really are overestimating my pop culture knowledge because I was like, I turned my head over it, and then by the time I realized I was supposed to laugh, you were already laughing. I was like, damn, okay, but good joke,
Mhm.
which is definitely the
Yeah,
best way to appreciate humor.
exactly. So this is a single black mana that exiles a land card from your graveyard and gives you mana from it.
I
So
mean,
this is like Deathrite Shaman, right? Like
this is
this is
basically Dark Ritual.
Is this Deathrite of Flame Shaman?
That's right up
D-
flame. I mean,
like, do, do you get it? Like, because
yeah,
like Rite of
yeah,
Flame is
yeah,
like
like
the
right up
one
flame.
mana
Yeah,
for
yeah,
two.
yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
God, now faith in my ability to comprehend any sort of humor is just shattered, I guess. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, as I am a cold, unfeeling machine, let's evaluate this card. I think that it's interesting because obviously the fetch land format that you think of that, and I think that like I mean I'm trying to think of like what is the most messed up thing you can do with this in a fetch land format that you can't already do with the Evoke Elementals, if that makes sense. Like I don't know, like you're like why go down a card to add to go +1 mana when I can go down a card to go like +5 mana. And that's not striking at this card. I'm just thinking like the first thing you think of in this card is like, oh wow, that's crazy because it's a ritual, and we are trained to look at rituals as, oh god, that's crazy. But unless you're in a fetch land format, I think that this is honestly either like fair to bad because you can only marginally use it to ramp relative to like a dork because on turn you're if you're not using this on in a fetch land format you likely can't activate a turn one, and then in a fetch land format I don't know how much of an impact it would actually have.
Mm-hmm. The place that I would really see this card, particularly played, would be in like a Goryo's Gristlebrand sort of setup, especially like a Gristol brand, I think it's sometimes called,
Oh yeah, yeah.
where like you've drawn 7 or 14 or 21 cards, and okay, I have a land drop, so I'm going to play a land, and then I'm going to get this out, and then I'm going to get from that one land drop I had into 2 mana, and then I'm going to spend either that black green on another like Goryo's effect, or I'm going to spend the green part on something that's going to like regain me a bunch of life that I already lost, or do some sort of like sequencing chain for that if before you've started comboing off, this can potentially get you the extra mana you need on the combo turn. And then after you've got like a Gristlebrand out, this is like not a totally dead draw because it can chain you into more action if you've just got a ton of cards in hand and 1 mana to start with. If that makes sense.
No, that does make
That might be
sense.
overthinking it,
No,
but
that does make sense, and it is like illustrating a scenario where it's like yeah, like fast combo will always still want fast mana, so that makes sense. Yeah, I think I don't know about Grishol brand specifically. I think because of how like I think that deck has so much like you want like such a almost exact, not maybe not exact sequence, but like you want so many slots in your hand are already like I hope it's this, I hope it's this, I hope it's this. Where like I'm not sure
mhm.
if embodiment fits into that like plan neatly, but yeah, I think the general idea of like fast combo along that vein will run mana advantage whatever it is. So yeah.
Mhm. The next card we'll be looking at is Stag of the Shifting Seasons, which is submitted by KIU 102. Um,
I'm
it's
sure they're
the,
very handsome. They're just a beautiful little boy. Great
you
guy.
know, I get that energy. I get those vibes. The Stag of the Shifting Seasons is 3 generic mana for a 2/2 artifact creature elk. It's a rare. It has when Stag of the Shifting Seasons dies, search your library for 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. And to pay 2 generic mana, sacrifice Stag of the Shifting Seasons, draw a card. Flavor text: woven by wicked hands to lead mortals astray.
Okay, so I designed this card obviously. Uh, I want to,
What?
but because of that, I kind of want to hear your thoughts on it first, so that it's clean of my like
I think
omniscience, I guess.
I think it's really missing a particular subtype. And can you guess what subtype I mean? Based on the
Cons
text on the card, I think it needs to say artifact creature elk and then something.
construct? No.
No.
Oh no. I God, I'm not
I,
doing any favors for my ability to
uh,
understand anything today.
the joke that I'm doing here is that I'm implying that I mean clue because it has the
Oh,
clue
cause it's
ability.
oh my god, it does. Ah, I
But
was
what
like,
I actually mean is that it should be a scarecrow because it's woven by wicked hands to lead mortals astray. This is like literally one of the scarecrow cards from
oh my
Shadowmoor
god,
Eventide.
oh my
Like
god,
in aesthetic, in flavor text, like all of the different parts of this. Like this is artifact feature elk scarecrow.
and it's autumn. God,
Uh huh.
oh my god,
Uh
how did
huh.
I not think of that? Okay. Oh god. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Okay, I'm actually gonna go and errata that right after this to Elk Scarecrow
Hashtag
then.
random eventide rare, as we say in the
In the
beacon of
business.
creation community.
Mhm.
So this is 3 mana that, uh, you know, for a 2/2, that's okay on an artifact and everything. And then you can pay 2 mana whenever to get 2 lands onto the battlefield, which is so you're paying 5 mana on an installment plan total, or you can just block with this, or chump attack it with it, or anything like that. It's this is oh, what is it called? Pilgrim Sigh? Is that the name of the
It's
little
a
copter that gets you a
yeah, yeah.
land?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh this is a rare one of those. This is what you get if you shift the rarity up to rare. Uh instead of a little dinky enter the battlefield, search for a land into your hand, this is you get onto the battlefield and then just get it to die. There's lots of ways that creatures can die.
Dumb ways to die. But yeah, any other thoughts?
It's 5 generic mana to draw you 3 cards, which is pretty reasonable on the bargain. Or 3 generic mana and a chump block, so gaining you some amount of life
Mhm.
and also drawing you 2 cards on the bargain there, if you can trade with this. And, at the end of the day, it could also be a win condition. So
Yeah, so I guess I'm just gonna talk
th-
through my thought.
this is
Oh,
pushing the edge of what I would see in any sort of normal colorless 3 mana sort of environment. In part just because I think that's more ramp than I would want in a totally colorless sort of package. But at the same time, if your opponent's not helping you out and you don't have any other sacrifice triggers, you are spending 5 mana for 2 lands, which is ultimately fair.
yeah. So for this month, I love making cubes for stuff, but I don't think I can commit to making a full cube for Moxtober, given that uh, the Mole Day cube is also going on. Shout out that event. Go check it out on the Custom Magic server. Community set about sciencey stuff. A lot of fun. Go check it out. Um, but I wanted to sort of make cards for cube, and so I have a pioneer set. I have a pioneer cube skeleton, and for each day I'm randomly rolling a slot and then designing 2 cards for that. So this was a 3 colorless creature. So obviously the most iconic like cube creature, colorless creature, I think, is Solemn Simulacrum, which I'm surprised didn't come up as like a comparison point. Um, but then I sort of was like going along the Solemn Simulacrum like thought process, like artifact creatures similar to that, and then I got to um, Commander Staple Burnished Heart, which is like sort of like every like new Commander player when you're playing on a budget, you pick up a copy of Burnished Heart, which is a 3 mana for an artifact creature elk 2/2. You pay 3 and sacrifice it to ramp 2. So it's 6 mana for 2 lands, and you have to pay the mana into it. Um, and then I was sort of inspired by that, and I merged it with another commander staple, which is Yavimaya Elder, uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is
That's a great poll. Yeah.
yeah. So which is one GG for a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for up to two basic land cards and put them into your hand. Or sorry, when it dies, and you can pay two and sacrifice it to draw a card, so you can forcibly trigger the search two lands. So this is sort of like a marrying of both of those, where uh, it you like can pay mana into it to ramp. It also has the you can just block with it and get its card advantage of Yavimaya Elder, sort of like best of both worlds. And the flavor is also a reference to the flavor on Burnished Heart, where this is kind of, I guess, the evil, edgy version of Burnished Heart, where uh,
Mm-hmm.
Burnished Heart flavor text is forged by divine hands to wander mortal realms. So
Woven by wicked hands to lead mortals astray. Well, yeah, I definitely think this is much more on the side of Solemn Simulacrum than it is on the side of Burnished Heart.
but yeah, like again, like
But
I don't think this should
mhm,
go in any retail like normal constructed format. I would not put this in a standard or all that. But again, I like playing with a little bit more pushed power level. That like this is like a pioneer level cube. I'd say is what the skeleton I'm using is. Um, I like playing around in that power level because it gives you the leeway to like make cards that are honestly just like a little more fucked up than you're allowed to make for a normal set, and that gives you like space to work with in terms of pushing effects that haven't been pushed before, if that makes sense.
sure, sure, that makes a lot of sense. And I think for like a specifically cube environment, um, basically 100% of my complaints go away, assuming that you want to be like enabling the things that this card does.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I have like in my head the thought is if I was making this a full cube, it would be I think a lot more focused on like lands, cause in like Moxtober theme of autumn definitely shouts that, and so I'd imagine that like there would be a standard ramp archetype, but there'd also be like lands and grave as like a mulch style mid range deck, which I guess hey the first card we talked about would play really well with that, um, and yeah so this would play nicely into that.
Great.
That's enough stroking my own ego. What's the next card?
The next card is Spirit of Summer's End. This is designed by Apo0895. It's two in a red for a 2/1 creature wolf elemental spirit. Uncommon. It has when Spirit of Summer's End enters the battlefield until end of turn, lands you control gain. Whenever this permanent is tapped for mana, it produces an additional red and deals 1 damage to you. And it has Evoke, Sacrifice a Forest. Flavor text. The new season comes forth in a dance of embers.
We were talking about evoke elementals in modern.
Mm-hmm.
Let's throw another one in there. Hell yeah. Um yeah, so this is basically a quote unquote free ritual. Um with the caveat being you can't use it turn 1, but it gets better as the game goes on because you have more lands to be able, so you're generating more mana. Um,
Mm-hmm.
my first thing
And
was
it's
like,
in-
yeah, before I saw the evoke, I was like, oh yeah, but how many lands are you gonna have to actually tap after you cast this? And then the evoke was like, all of them, in fact, except well, all of them minus one. But yeah,
and you can even tap the force that you're sacrificing for at least 1 green. So you want to be spending this mana on an odd mana spell because you'll get double all of your lands in play and then one from the forest, presumably.
mm-hmm.
But I think it's also really interesting that you really only start getting anything out of this card, even on the evoke, on turn 3, which is also its mana cost. So on turn 3, you can sacrifice a forest and like be able to cast a 5 mana spell. That's kind of the first time that you're really making like progress on this, and you're still sacrificing a land permanently, and this card doesn't stick around, and you're dealing 2 damage to you, but like you're getting a 5 mana spell on turn 3 potentially. It's kind of a fun balance in that like the turn that you're actually going to be casting this for free matches up with the mana cost, like on the top right hand corner, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can just go +1 on turn two if you're if you're
Yeah, but
but like
like,
that's not a good that's not typically going to be a good play. But I mean, we did just talk about, like +1 mana can sometimes matter with the embodiment of autumn. But yeah, yeah, really, like, you
but
want to use on
if
turn
you
three
want
plus.
to cast a 3 mana spell on turn 2,
There's no other cards that can enable that, Juliet. No, no others. Magic is such an
I
innocent game. Huh.
I think the flavor for this really, really works well for me. I really, really appreciate the wolf elemental spirit as a story instead of like the orcish lumberjack as a story. Do you know what I mean? It makes me
Hmm.
think of. Do you know the first episode of Spice and Wolf?
No,
Is
I
that
actually I
a
haven't watched that.
cultural reference? The festival to pray for no wind, as they say. Um,
Hmm.
which is just the idea of, hey, we're going to take all of this plant matter and we're going to build this big fire, and then this I not that they build a big fire in that episode, but just this idea of like, hey, this like wolf harvest spirit, this spirit of summers, and as we were talking about like autumn as something that is about ending in the same time that it's about beginning, like, hey, that's what harvests are about. It's about all these different things beginning because we now have all this food, but it's also the end of the crop growing season. And so you're sacrificing the forest, you put all the logs or the timber or the wicker or anything, you do the big fire, and then the spirit comes to bless your harvest, to bless everything that you've been able to produce. That's like, to me, that's a really compelling story for the like mana flare sort of flavor.
Yeah, and again, it's not without cost in terms of like the damage it does to you, right? Like there, it's sort of like almost like you have to get a little bit close to the flame for to feel the warmth. Um, but yeah, uh, I don't have anything else to say about this card. It's just neat.
I agree. It is neat. And our next card is Autumnal Triad. It's a submission from, it looks like designed by Hyzak or Koanon. Autumnal Dryad is 3 and a green for a 2/2 creature dryad. It's an uncommon with trample and pay a red or green hybrid mana. Sacrifice a land. Put a +1/+1 counter on Autumnal Dryad and draw a card. Activate only as a sorcery.
So on its base, 2/2 trample, not the greatest, but if you're willing to lay some investment into it, it can grow. It can become like a large threat terrifyingly quickly, and depending on like how your deck is built, right? Like you might not need those extra lands, especially because you're drawing into additional cards. So you could just like quote unquote cycle through a land each turn, arguably. Um, or there might be cards which care about how many lands you have in graveyard and so on and so forth. So I think the biggest thing is I kind of, now that we have ward tech, I kind of wish this had like a ward cost, because not only is the like you're paying a lot into it to get your investment back. So I really want like I kind of wish this was 3/3 base or like uh or yeah, or had like Ward 2 or something. But otherwise I'm a big fan of sort of what this design implies about its limited.
And realistically, I think it being a 2/2 is what makes it very interesting to me, which is that, like, is a fun, flexible card that encourages you to be a little bit greedy. Uh, and you can just be a little bit greedy, or you can be very greedy. You can plan to be like, well, when I have just way too many lands, I can basically, play a land and cycle it immediately and get a little bit extra and, be able to draw a card off of it. You can be like, well, I have I'm at parity with my opponent. Is it worth sacrificing a land to get a card to like kind of get the advantage on them? But what if I draw something and I can't cast it? Like the space for this in limited, and then I'm sure in that limited there'd be like, here's the perfect combination of cards together where this card really sings. You absolutely want to go like all in. You've got some other like sacrifice synergies or some other graveyard synergies or +1/+1 counter synergies, or who knows what like combination of factors. Protector of the forest that gives your dryads that sort of like ward ability, like some
Mm-hmm.
combination of things. This card is like such a piece of a puzzle while not being the whole puzzle solution on its own.
Mm-hmm.
In the fact that, oh no, though, sometimes you will draft this card, sometimes you'll have this card and be thinking that you're going to get a lot of it, but it's just a 2/2 for 4. And a 2/2 for 4 is not a card you want to put in your deck, but it's a card you want to play out of your hand very often in games because, you know, a 2/2 on the board isn't nothing. And so I think that floor, with then, because it has that floor, it gives you the opportunity to kind of do other busted things in the limited format with it. Because once this becomes a 4/4 with trample that keeps drawing you a card every turn, or once you've like poured all your stuff into it and you've drawn 6 extra cards and your opponent, and like you don't have any lands left in play, but you've got these other things that you can do, um some kind of evoke elementals, if you
Mm-hmm.
were.
Yeah.
I think there's enough potential for upside, and there's enough really interesting kind of sticky parts on this, that this is one of my favorite creeds that I've seen in a while, as far as like pay 1 mana and like press your luck to draw a card.
Mm-hmm. One of my friends, Zangi, is currently making a set uh, based around the idea of small games, which is just essentially short games, games where you see fewer cards, there you have less resources, so there's sort of like a idea that uh, resources like making opponents discard cards is all of a sudden a lot more impactful than it would be otherwise, right? It's not just necessarily like a faster format, it's a format where like each resource that you have is so much more meaningful or important. And I think this is the kind of card that I would love to see in that environment, if that makes sense, because they're just like the way that you value resources changes so much in that sort of uh, uh, in that sort of like format where all of a sudden sacrificing lands isn't as much of a deal breaker when again like there aren't like as many crazy bombs you're trying to like stall into or whatever. This is your bomb, and you just
Mm-hmm.
build back up an advantage after your opponent has like torn apart your hand or whatever, or just like dropped a bunch of tiny creatures. All of a sudden, this just comes back, refills your hand, grows large enough that they can't break through your board, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And so were all of the cards that we've seen today.
Well, well, do you want to discuss your card? We could quickly do that.
Sure, we can. I think it's being the first card of the season, absent a little bit of context, but sure, I'd be very happy to. This card is Wassailing Tankard, or Wassailing Tankard. The thing isn't doing the thing, it's a thing that you take along as you do the thing. Uh, it's 4 generic mana for a common artifact clue equipment. It has when Wassailing Tankard enters the battlefield, create a 3/2 black rogue creature token and attach this to it. Equipped creature gets +1, -1, has haste, and must attack each turn if able. It has equip, 1 in a red, and the clue ability to sacrifice this, draw a card.
My immediate impression is I'm a big fan of the colorless card, but colored equip cost, because and specifically because you're making like it's essentially a creature that leaves behind an equipment, so you can play the creature in any deck, but if you want to get full value out of it, you want to be in red. But as a common, having that flexibility, there's something really clean and fun about that I like. Where I think that the commons shouldn't be like this is equally awesome in every deck. You want there to be like actual choice points, right, for your drafters, but you also want like flexibility so drafters aren't stuck in like a bad deck and they have playables. And this feels like exactly the kind of common I'd love to see, where it's like, yeah, I'll put this in to fill in my 4 slot in my relatively aggressive deck, and I'll feel pretty fine about it. And then I'll pick up like a red deck, which has like maybe equipment synergies, maybe not, and go crazy with it. And again, it has like pseudo cycling with the clue ability. So even in a colorless deck, even if you can't use it as an equipment, you're getting somewhere with it. So it's a really flexible and cool card.
And in this particular case, it's for a very specific limited format, which is a kind of different twist on a jumpstart format. This is my jumpstart remix of Castmire, the community designed haunted like murder mystery mansion
Huh.
uh,
I saw the
Magic the
cast
Gathering set.
I saw Castmire playtest card and I was like, oh yeah, I guess that's just like the default art background thing. No, okay, it's Castmire is back from beyond the door.
This is Juliet's take on Castmire before it's too late, which is to say, like, next year in canon magic, Wizards of the Coast, if you've heard of it, hypothetically is releasing a like murder mystery set and a infinite sprawling mansion set, which are like two of the big parts of what made Castmire what it is. And so part of my pitch for making this work, and I'm excited to hopefully have a fun thing by the end of Moxtober here, is what if your jumpstart like 40 card deck wasn't two jumpstart packs put together, but what if it was three jumpstart packs put together, but
Interesting.
they're not each 20 cards? They're
Right. Okay,
each.
and that explains the colorless a little bit
Mhm.
more, because you need to like account for the fact that in an environment like Jumpstart, especially when you start adding packs, you need cards that can be reasonably played without having access to, let's say, all 3 colors of mana if they're all 3 different colored packs.
Mhm. One of my number one like ideas in designing Jumpstart, obviously there's Juliet's strong theory of Jumpstart design, which has to do with like the fundamental ideas of what gold cards are and like how the color pie works. But one of the other like really simple principles is don't punish the players, because like don't punish the players for deck building sort of things, because they aren't doing deck building. Like you really need to make sure that things that you might normally do in a like draft environment to potentially punish players for being too greedy or for making like suboptimal decisions in a jumpstart format, don't punish your players for that. And so part of that is having more things that are castable if you don't have quite the right colors, or slightly better fixing than you might otherwise have. And this is kind of part, you might think of this as maybe one of the like, I don't know, clue equipments that might go alongside, like, I don't know, a card type that has to do with places and a card type that has to do with legendary creatures that might fit together to be three parts of your jumpstart deck in a murder mystery mansion environment. Uh, if you get what I am gesturing at in the form of, the
Mm.
person, the murder weapon, and the
Yeah,
place in a game
yeah.
of Clue.
It's Clue. It's Clue. I get it. I get it. Okay, I can get one reference in this whole episode. Okay.
Also known as Cluedo for our European listeners.
Mm. Had a great movie adaptation, surprisingly.
But yeah, the one of the things that I was figuring out is that I really want to get like doors to matter a lot. It's like, well, how do you make doors matter? It's like, well, you have people go door to door, and like, well, what do people do door to door? Well, they go wassailing. Like this is a classic sort of idea as you get into the later parts of the year. You have a bunch of people go door to door to door, and like sing loudly and demand like food and drink from the people at each door, and sometimes the people inside the doors come and join in. And so this is part of what the whole like goblin faction that I have going on is they're going
Mhm.
just
I
this
do love that
massive,
for a
this
goblin
grand
faction.
waltz
Like,
going from door to door, and singing and dancing and
mhm.
just like carousing, and anybody who's doing any like plotting and scheming is just going to be interrupted. Like they're not evil, they're a very red group, they are just extremely rowdy and having a good time at your expense.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It feels like a great way to sort of keep up like the parts of like goblin typal identity that it's sort of just like again there's like the rowdiness aspect to it, but without making them like stupid. They're just having fun. I like that.
Hmm.
Um,
They might be a little reckless,
yeah,
there
yeah.
might be a little dancing plague, a little bit of that.
Hmm. Also, I don't know if this is just gonna be me, but this was the first time I'd ever heard of wassailing, so I've learned a new word
Hmm.
today. Definitely, the first image that popped into my head when I read that word was just Waluigi parasailing. Um, so, so
uh, I and there's classically two types of wassailing, which is house wassailing, as we see here, and the other main type is orchard wassailing, which is a great segue to tomorrow's tomorrow's theme for cards, which will be orchard.
yeah, and the unfortunate reality with these videos is that usually by the time you're watching this, it's going to be too late to submit for them for video purposes. But still, please submit to them for the file because people are going to be checking out the full file and we want them to be able to see whatever cards you submit. Um, just screw it. This is my show. I'm just going to quickly. I want to do. We've talked about mostly like serious cards today. I just want to quickly shout
Hmm.
out. These are not cards for like super serious discussion. These are just like fun cards. The first one is designed by Panfex. It's Autumnal Blast. One in a red for an instant, and it deals damage to target permanent equal to the number of deciduous keywords or mechanics present among spells or permanents its controller controls, plus 2. And it has helpful reminder text for what deciduous is. And
Consult https colon slash slash mtgfandom.com / wiki / deciduous for a list of deciduous mechanics.
yeah, and I love this pun as just like deciduous being the tree, but also being a mechanic, a term for mechanics, and just sort of
Hmm.
bridging those two together. I love it's cheeky and it's fun, and this is a interesting way to make that matter. Um,
Hmm.
the second one is Singer of Autumn's Colors, uh, which is 1 and a green for a 1/1 elf bard uncommon. Whenever you cast a spell that's brown, orange, red, or yellow, put a +1/+1 counter on Singer of Autumn's Colors. Um, which it's a riff on Quirion Dryad, but in another timeline where the color pie was very, very different and a lot more autumnal. Uh,
It would be very interesting if the 5 colors of magic were green, brown, orange, red, and yellow.
yeah, I honestly I wonder what that world would look like. I know people have done alt color pie for brown, orange, and yellow before, so People who are more familiar with the off-color sets and off-color lore can uh, chip in on what that
Can
would
you
look like.
imagine what red cards would be like?
Insane. Um,
Also, I really do think though that like this is a an interesting card to print in an unset where like
mhm,
it like it basically it just triggers off of red cards,
mhm.
but maybe if you have like old border artifacts, you could like you could unrule those as counting as brown. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Because
Or yeah, or
that's
if
the
you
way
have like,
artifacts.
when you said old cards, I was thinking about the cards where you could like they color wash stuff. So it's like
Hmm.
that spell is now orange. Like you could, cause, like the ones where you can replace one color word with another color
Sure.
word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Somebody print autumn lace that allows you to
Ooh.
replace any like words in a text box with brown, orange, red, or yellow.
Hmm. And yeah, speaking of designing in the future, uh, this is a far worse transition. But yeah, um, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks everyone for listening and or watching. Um, like I mentioned up top, uh, in the description, there's links to the custom magic server, the Beacon of Creation server, um, where you can share cards you've designed and submit them to this collected file. There'll be a link to the Dropbox folder, which has the collected file for Autumn, so you can check out all the designs we've shown here and some that we didn't. Um, and finally, it'll have a list of all the prompts, so you can plan ahead for future Moxtober days. But yeah, it feels good to be back. Moxtober is always such a fun time of year. It like obviously these are like festive times of year in general with Thanksgiving and Halloween coming through, but I love the way that it manifests in custom magic spaces, and I'm excited to talk more about the cards that people make because that's always just the best thing.
Hmm. Thanks for having me on the show. And thank you
Oh
to
wait, that
everyone
reminds
who's
me.
designed and submitted the cards.
If you want to appear on the show like Juliet did, just shoot me a message. It's Kaiu 102 on Discord, and I'm always looking for new people to host with and get new perspectives on cards with. But yeah, definitely thanks for joining me, Juliet. It's always a pleasure to have you on, and
And you can find me at Folly on co host.
you can find me only here on YouTube these days. But
Mhm.
yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and until tomorrow, this is Caillou signing off.